which is, so for folks who are in the room that haven't been part of the Brushy Fork Leadership Summit over the past week, we are a strategic initiative of Berea College, and we do leadership and community development in Central Appalachia. And each year we provide and do a leadership summit where we bring together people from around Central Appalachia to talk about community development and leadership development in the region. And of course, the last couple of years, we've ended up online with our event. And so we're glad to have the folks who are part of the Leadership Summit here. And I also want to welcome some special guests that we have with us, representatives of the National Coalition of Promise Zones, and they are joining us as part of their federal convening. And so we give a special shout out to them for joining us for this keynote address. We're kind of crossing the stream, so to speak, and bringing together the Brushy Fork Leadership Summit and this federal convening for the Promise Zones as well. We have also asked to join us Dreama Gentry. Now, she's perhaps best known in this region and actually across the nation for her work that improves lives from cradle to career for children in Eastern Kentucky. She also counts Geoffrey Canada as an inspiration, a thought partner, and a mentor in the work that she is leading for children in Eastern Kentucky. And so we couldn't think of a more appropriate person to introduce Geoff Canada. So Dreama, if you will go ahead and introduce Geoff for us. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Donna. And it's great to see all the names here. And it's great to see the Brushy Fork folks and the folks from throughout Appalachian region, but also the folks from that National Coalition of Promise Zones. You know, the Promise Zones are similar to our Promise Neighborhoods in that they were an Obama administration initiative, and they were influenced and inspired by the work of Geoff Canada. And so I had the opportunity to first meet Geoff and his team back in 2010 when we received funding as the first rural place to be a Promise neighborhood. And Promise Neighborhoods, like I said, they were modeled after Geoff's program there at the Harlem Children's Zone. So I got all these questions saying, would something that worked in Harlem work in Owsley County, Kentucky? And I can tell you it's been 11 years, and what we found out that yes, it does work. And it works because Geoff believes, like we believe, that place matters and that local residents, local leaders are the key to addressing those challenging problems of place. And that if we give local leaders the opportunity, the data, the research, and the power to actually think about creating a place where all young people succeed, then it can happen. And so, yes, the work that Geoff has done in Harlem, it's impacted deeply the work that we do in Appalachian Kentucky, and it impacts places across the country. So before Geoff speaks, I'm going to play a short video that provides some background on Geoff and his work. After the video, Geoff will join us. He'll do his talk. And then Donna will come back and there'll be an opportunity for Q&A. So if you have questions, you'll have an opportunity after Geoff speaks. So Donna, if you'll show the video, and then we'll just be inspired by Geoff.
Ed Bradley first reported on Geoffrey Canada 3.5 years ago, but back then there was no way to tell if his children's zone was working. Today, however, results are in, and they're nothing short of stunning.
Dr. Roland Fryer is a professor in the economics department at Harvard. He's conducted the first independent statistical study of Geoffrey Canada's efforts to close the racial achievement gap in his school.
The elementary school level, he closed the achievement gap in both subjects, math and reading.
Actually eliminating the gap in elementary school.
We never say anything like that. Absolutely eliminating the gap.
Exhibit A, the zone's Promise Academy Charter School.
So these are our fourth graders.
This year's fourth grade class is special. It's the first class where all the kids have been in the zone's pipeline since birth.
The Harlem Children's Zone, which is a great example of Geoffrey Canada organizing a comprehensive way to give those poor kids in Harlem a chance to wind up and be David Letterman or Bill Clinton someday, or be great doctors or scientists by dealing with all the various challenges they have. So if somebody gives money or time to the Harlem Children's Zone, they know that they're going to get a high rate of return.
Geoffrey Canada, the program's inspirational, innovative founder, put it best. Instead of helping some kids beat the odds, the Harlem Children's Zone is actually changing the odds altogether. And it's working. Parents in Harlem are actually reading more to their kids. Their kids are staying in school and passing statewide tests at higher rates than other children in New York City. They're going to college in a place where it was once unheard of. They've even placed third on a national chess championship. So we know this works. And if we know it works, there's no reason this program should stop at the end of those blocks in Harlem. It's time to change the odds for neighborhoods all across America.
This is Jeopardy!
Same category, 800.
I'm Harlem Children's Zone President Geoffrey Canada. We will do whatever it takes to make sure that your child enters and succeeds in college.
I'll bite. Why is it important for underprivileged children to succeed? Spin your scenario.
It is absolutely critical if our country is going to remain number one. You know, America is not number one or number two or even in the top 10 or even in the top 15 when it comes to reading and math and English.
You ever hear those people who say, you know, this is crazy, you can't do it, and think that maybe you bit off too much?
As long as I am here, we're going to push this envelope as hard and as far as possible. And I think that in the end, it's going to be important that we demonstrate that we can get even the toughest kids to make it in America. Our job as educators, there's some stuff we know that we can do, and we've got to do better. The evaluation, we have to start with kids early. We have to make sure that we provide the supports for young people. We've got to give them all of these opportunities. So that we have to do. But this innovation issue, this idea that we've got to keep innovating until we really nail this science down is something that is absolutely critical. And this is something, by the way, that I think is going to be a challenge for our entire field. America cannot wait another 50 years to get this right.
Please welcome Geoffrey Canada. Really, I just want to kiss you. Just want to kiss you.
Ed Bradley first reported on Geoffrey Canada.
Well, hello, everybody. I so wish we were all in person. And I promise Dreamer, when we can all be back together, Donna, if you guys invite me back, I just can't wait to be there with you all. I just have to say, you know, that Oprah piece was kind of fun, but my wife is still mad at me. I married this Black woman from Harlem. She don't play that let's kiss on Geoffrey stuff, all right? So we're going to not show her that part of it. So first of all, I sincerely want to thank Donna, you and Dreamer for inviting me here. I think Donna knows, I know Dreamer. We've been partners. It seems funny, she knows I care about the children in Appalachia. I care about the children in Eastern Kentucky. I care that America seemingly has forgotten those kids. They are not on any of the national radar screens. Somehow there are kids that we just throw away in this country. And the more I learned about what was happening in rural America, the more I said, we need people like you all, those of you who are here, to raise your game, because this thing has not eased up and it is not going anywhere. And I keep telling everybody, if we don't fix it, this thing is not going to get fixed. So thank you for inviting me here. I just warn you, after a while, I get wound up and I start yelling. Don't take it personal. I'm not yelling at you, but I am just struck with how complicated this moment is. And I want to say a little bit about leadership and what it means to lead in the most difficult time in my professional career. Now, you know what? I've been at this, I was trying to count, I don't know, it's like 45 years I've been teaching and in education. And look, when I started my work in Boston in the 70s, Boston was a segregated city. It was going through busing. I had never dealt with that kind of overt racism. My kids in Boston were all kicked out of the public school. They were almost all white kids from South Boston and East Boston and Charlestown. And they were the shock troops for the anti-busing movement, right? These were the kids throwing bricks at the buses and all of that stuff. And I took this job in the school, and I had just finished up my graduate work at the Harvard Ed School. And I just thought I was this young, bright teacher. And they hired me so quickly at this job. And I was like, wow, that was easy. I must be really something. What they didn't tell me was all of these kids were pretty racist. And they had never had a Black teacher before. And they had gotten kicked out of their school because they were throwing bricks and yelling and fighting. And I tell people my first day of being a teacher at the school was the teacher's equivalent to Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. Some of you don't know what that movie is, but those kids took one look at me and they were like, who is this guy? And how did we get this Black guy in our classroom? So here's the funny part of my career. I started my career helping poor white kids from the housing projects in Boston. Those were my kids. And yeah, they had issues around race and all the rest of this stuff, but you grow up poor, isolated, have family challenges, no basic support, yeah, you're gonna have issues. And in the end, they reminded me of the kids I grew up with in the South Bronx. There was really no difference. And I learned something about poverty, about poor education, and about a community falling apart that has nothing to do with race. And in this country, so often these two things are tied together that it confuses people. But I started my career understanding that place matters. And if you isolate folks and take all of the supports from them and give them no ability to get a decent education, and they feel like outsiders and people don't respect them, you're going to end up with all kinds of social and behavioral problems from children and families. And that I learned back in the 70s, and it has stayed with me. Now, look, the rest of my career I spent working with Black and brown kids in Harlem, but that's not where I started my career. And that's not where I learned that there are some basic universals in this work that we have to really deal with. So our job was hard before COVID, and it was really hard. And I would be here talking to you all saying how tough this job is and how tough this work is. In my entire career, whether it was starting in Boston, whether it was coming back to New York, when Harlem was going through a heroin epidemic and the place was literally falling down, whether it was in the 90s when we had the crack cocaine epidemic and my children were being shot on the streets on a regular basis, all of those were tough, tough times in my career. What we're going through today is tougher than all of that. So one of the things I just want to say about leadership is that you all have to understand this is a historic challenge that we are facing. It's not what we faced 10 years ago. It's not anything I've ever faced in my life before. This is historic. And we have to keep that in mind because the country is trying to get back, right? Everybody wants to get back. Can we go back to the movies, go back to the ball games? Everybody's watching football. Everything's great out there. Hey, we're back. Our kids and families, they are not back. They are deep in the middle of the worst mental health crisis this country has ever seen. And our kids, those that we care about, are the ones that are hurting the most. And if our job was hard before, it's even harder now. Now look, if you all didn't know this, I wouldn't tell it to you because I don't want you saying, oh, I'm getting out of this business. who wants to do this stuff now, but you know what I'm talking about. I'm telling you what you're seeing and what you're living, that this is where we are. And I want to say something to you, because it is times like this that we have to remember, why did we even get involved in this work? What drove us to be in the toughest places, doing the hardest things? For me, I remember what it was like growing up in the South Bronx when I was a kid, and that community was coming apart literally by the seams. Everybody who could get out got out. There was crime and drugs and gangs and violence. And you know, when I was part of the documentary Waiting for Superman, we had finished the documentary, but it didn't have a name for like 6 months. And I kept calling the producer, hey, Davis, what's the name? He said, oh, we haven't thought of it. What about this? What about that? It kept going on. About 6 months later, he called me. He said, Jeff, we know what we're going to call the documentary. I said, great. What are we going to call it? He said, we're going to call it Waiting for Superman. And I was stunned and flattered, because they named the movie after one of my statements that I made in the documentary, talking about growing up in the South Bronx as a young child, 9, 10 years old. And I was a big comic book fan. I read comic books all the time, but they were all DC comics. Marvel wasn't, sorry, no Spider-Man, none of that. It was Superman and Superwoman, all of that stuff. My mother told me there was no Superman, and I began to cry. And she thought I was crying because there's no Easter Bunny, right? Oh, isn't that cute? You didn't believe me. That's not why I was crying. I was crying because even at that age, I knew, growing up in the South Bronx, if there were no superheroes, we weren't going to make it. We weren't getting out of that place. It was clear to me that this was a place that was designed to destroy children's lives. And if there wasn't somebody with the kind of power of a superhero to come in and save us, we weren't getting out. Now, I know some of you look at it, but Jeff, you got out. Yeah, but you know what? I had 3 brothers. Only 2 of my brothers made it out alive. My wife had 3 brothers and sisters. She's from Harlem. None of them made it into their 30s. I know something about the impact that poverty has on families and children. And every time I feel like I get tired, I remember that the only superhero coming into our children's lives are the ones on this screen right now. There is nobody else coming. So when I go into my programs and they start whispering, oh, there's Jeff. Yeah, it's cute, but yeah, but I stand up taller, right? I try to look more powerful. I want my kids to know, yes, somebody's here with the kind of power who can fight for you and help you figure out how to get from here to a place where you want to be in your life. And that's our mission. And so I just want to say to you all that this moment, our children and families need us more at this moment than ever before. And we're almost at our most fragile. Look, I'll say for myself, I'm not going to speak for all of you. I've been terrified for my children. I've been terrified for my grandchildren. My 3rd son got COVID. He was so sick. My wife and I, we literally were terrified. And that trauma is still with us. I was terrified for my wife, and guess what? I was scared for myself. Every time I go out, and I've been going out and trying to talk, every time I do, I come back and I'm just saying, how many days do you have to wait before you kind of know you're all right again? And God forbid, I wake up coughing in the night. And I'm thinking, is that just like a regular cough, or was that something? We have been traumatized. Our families, we're the healers, and we've been traumatized. And we need to deal with that ourselves. Look, here's a message for for leadership. Leaders need help too. We need support. We need counseling. We need somebody to understand we're doing the best we can, and it's hard out there, and our work is hard, and it's draining. And yet, as we're looking into the future, it doesn't look that bright right now. So people have to, well, Jeff, how do you stay optimistic in all of this? And to me, it's the challenge of leadership. That is the challenge. It's easy to be a leader when everything's going great, right? Everything's good. You look wonderful. Everything is working. It's great to be a leader then. Everybody's like, yeah, that's the leadership I want. But that's not the leadership we have now. We have a different kind of leadership this moment. Things do not look great. Things are not going to be all right. We've got a lot of work to do in front of us. And my thought about this, I didn't know this day was coming, but I knew that leaders like you all need to know that all of us fail and all of us struggle. So Paul Tuff, he was a writer, editorial writer for the New York Times. He wrote a book about our work, which was entitled "Whatever It Takes," right? And that's our theme, right? And you know what? We're gonna do whatever it takes. And folks didn't quite understand what that we really meant. That we're gonna do whatever. They kept saying you can't do that, and I was like, no, we're gonna do whatever it takes to save our kids and our families. So Paul, I invited Paul, and he wanted to write the book, and he said to me, Jeff, you know, I have to write honestly. So I'm gonna write the good, I'm gonna write the bad. He said, so you have no censorship over me at all. And if you want censorship, I'm out. I said, no, Paul, look, it's gonna be important for the field to know how hard this work is. Write the truth. So he's writing the truth, everything's going good. We had a crisis and our schools were failing. So I had started these schools, Paul was writing about it, and a decision was made that we couldn't open up our high school. And I had promised these kids now that they were going to stay with me through college. I told them, I stood up in front of all of them. I told their parents, I said, trust me. I know other people have let you down. I will not let you down. You will stay with me. Your kids will stay with me until they graduate from college. And we realized we weren't going to open up a high school for an additional year. So my current 8th graders were not going to be with me. And I had to call the kids in and tell them and their parents. It was the worst failure I've ever suffered. I was past being humiliated. I just realized these kids and their parents, they believed me. They trusted me. And now I was going to go in and tell them, not you. Your class, I'm not going to be able to open a high school. The next year I will, but not this year. I was literally in tears that whole day before that evening parent meeting. And if you read Paul's book, Whatever It Takes, and you open up inside, he has an acknowledgement and a thank you for me calling him and inviting him in to this meeting so he could observe my biggest professional failure in my career. Folks said, when you're about to fail really, really big, why would you call the press? And hey, come on in, watch what a disaster this is going to be. The reason was I knew I would end up succeeding, that this failure was going to be temporary, but I wasn't going to give up. And I said, when I'm successful, people are going to say, oh yeah, that was easy for Jeff because he had this or he had that, or he never really had the kind of challenges we have, and his problems aren't like my. And I just said, I want the whole world to know, if you come in the deep end of the pool, if you come into the end of the pool where kids drown, if they don't get help, there's going to be failure there. The question is, are you going to pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and work twice as hard to be successful? So you fast forward 10 years, You heard him say we closed the achievement gap. We got our state tests. Our students perform as high as white students in New York City and New York State in math and reading. People look at that and celebrate that. I don't want people to look at that and not understand what leaders have to go through, because I've watched folks give up because it's hard, and you give it your all and you fail, and people lose confidence in you, maybe your board, maybe your staff, maybe your family. How do leaders stand up in that moment and have the courage and the faith to go back and do it over and right? Because if anybody thinks there's going to be a straight line for success, get out the business right now. It ain't going to happen. I know maybe you're thinking next year is going to be the year. Nah, I'm just telling you, it don't work like that. It works like you take 3 steps forward and maybe only 2 steps back, right? So you're still up a step, and you keep going at that rate. I think the issue that I want to highlight for our group is that part of leadership is a deep faith that in the end, smart people can come together and figure it out and not hide from the truth. Because there's another thing that goes on. Dreamer knows we're a data-driven organization, right? And if you're in the deep end of the pool, the data is bad. So I'm just telling you, if you want to look at data and work in our field, the data is going to be bad. So we are always looking at who's the worst, and it's where it is the worst, that's where we want to go to help. So the issue is what happens when you get data and you've worked really hard and the data is not good. George, or some of you might know George Calhoun, is my chief operating officer. When we became a transparent organization that we would post our data up, right? So you had to come in and say how your kids are doing, what their test scores, what their promotion was, all of that stuff. We had a saying: the longer the person talked before they got to the numbers, the worse the data was going to be, right? Oh, Jeff, you should have seen we had a great field trip and our parents really are excited about what we're, and they're going on, and George and I are looking at one another. This data is going to be really, really bad. The people who came out right away and said, Jeff, let me show you where we were in October. Now I want to take you to March, and I want you to see, we understood that leading there was important. Now here's the challenge. For years, people wanted to explain away bad data. And our thing was, no, let's not explain it away. Let's fix the problem so the data changes. Let's accept that data gives us information, and don't hide from it. Don't try and, powder it up and cover it up. Well, do that with your funders, because you don't want them pulling the funding too fast. And I hope no funders are on the phone. But for inside the organization, we have to use that information to get better at what we're doing. And that is a tough leadership, because I'll tell you, every time we fail, right now, even right now, my team comes and wants to explain why it's really not a failure. No, Jeff, it really wasn't that bad. No, don't. You're looking at it the wrong way. No, I'm looking at a 37. There's only one way to look at that. All right. This issue about, I think, leadership, how you help folks understand data and how you use data, and how you don't let it defeat you, but how you use that information to build a stronger organization, is something that I think leaders have to really engage. I just want to say 2 other things. One is about courage. For a lot of my career, I knew what I needed to do to save our kids, but I didn't tell anybody, because I was like, hey, I'll never get the money. No one will ever allow me to do this. So you know what? I'll do the best I can do. And I lived in a world where rich people did whatever it took for their kids, and poor folks were expected to do as best they could, knowing it was going to be a failure. It took me a lot to have the courage to say, I want for my kids what upper middle class kids have. I want the safety, I want the sports, I want the arts, I want the tutoring. I want them to have an equal set of opportunities. In fact, they need more than the other kids because they have less in terms of their family support and community support. That ability to stand up to folks and say, no, I want my kids to have the best. If you knew how many people were upset with that concept, that you want to give poor people all of that, and what's that going to cost? And how do you expect to scale that? I said, look, I'm not worried about scaling. I'm just worried about saving my kids in Harlem. If I can save them, then I have done a good job. The other issue was I had one goal, which was to have my kids graduate from college. And people beat up on me about this goal. And they were like, what kind of elitist are you? You're talking about college, only college and all of it. And what I've said to folks is I have a basic belief. Whenever someone questions you, right? So if you don't know what to do about something, people are talking about vaccines, that you don't know what to do, I tell them always do what rich people do, right? So that's my theory. I know a bunch of rich people because I have to raise quite a bit of money. By the way, I tried raising money from poor people. It didn't work out so well. So I just know a lot of rich people. And every single one of them had only one aspiration for their children. One, to finish college. I've never heard a person who, as a professional person, who had a 10-year-old who wanted anything else for their child. So you know what I tell people? That's what I wanted for my own children. So that's what I want for the children I'm paid to work for. I am not lowering my expectations. Now, how do you do it? It's tough, it's hard, but that's what I want. For those of you who are parents out there, my wife and I, we have 4 kids. 3 of them, we had the same aspirations for all of them. 3 of them went to college, 1 didn't. By the way, I think that's a universal law. If you've got 4 kids, one of them's not going to do the right thing. Don't get upset, start beating up. Whoa, what did we do wrong? Just go with it. That's how life is. Move on. But that was his choice, not my choice. My choice was to give all of my kids the abilities to go to college. If they decide not to, that's fine. But it's not going to be because they didn't get in, they weren't accepted, or they don't think they're smart enough to make it in college. So the last thing I want to say is, in this field as a leader, you have to take care of yourself. You have to take care of yourself physically. And I mean that. Your physical health. You have to get enough sleep. You have to eat right. You have to exercise. I mean, if you don't want to burn out, if you want to say, yeah, I'm going to do 30 years of this, I'm going to do 20 years of this, you have to put your own physical health at the center of your strategy. You got to take care of yourself mentally. We've been stressed out. We've got issues. I got issues in family. I got stuff that's just happening. It seems like every time I turn around, something else is going on. And now I got to deal with work and my job and funders and all of that stuff at the same time. My question to you all is, who's helping you? Who's supporting your own mental health in a way that allows you to continue to stay in this healthy field? And the last thing I want to say is something about your spiritual health. I believe that we all have a finite amount of empathy and compassion. And every day you go to work, if you're giving it everything you got, by the time you get home, it's about used up, right? I don't know about you, how many times you've gone home and say, sorry, I say to my son, I just can't. I know you need me right now. I just can't. I gave it all at the office. How you replenish that every day? How do you make sure that you don't end up with a spiritual deficit, that you can't wake up that next morning and be ready? I'm going out there, I'm going to save the world. We've got to worry about this. And I don't care what it is, if it's a church, or synagogue, if it's yoga, somewhere you've got to replenish your spiritual health if you're going to continue to do this work as a leader, because we're going to have to be at this for a while. So I want to stop there. again say how much I admire the work you all are doing, how I acknowledge how complicated and difficult this is. But this is a time when, somebody said, you're going to be preaching to the choir. I said, yeah, I've known a few choirs. They need some preaching too. Everybody gets worn down in this work. So with that, I'm going to stop and open it up for questions. And Donna, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Sure. Well, thank you so much, Jeff. One of the things that I miss with being online and not being in person is the sound of applause. And I can just imagine, had we been here on Berea's campus and you had been in front of our group, that people would be standing right now and applauding you. So thank you very much for your words. And especially, it was liberating to me to hear you say that this is a historic challenge that we're facing, because I think we're all feeling that. And it's almost liberating to hear you articulate that way. So thank you for that. And we do want to open the floor, so to speak, for questions. And there are a couple ways that you can do that. And under the reactions button, there's a way that you can raise your hand, and that helps us see you to know that you're asking a question, because we have a large group here. And the other thing you can do is just put your question into the chat. So if you have a question that you would like Jeff to address, please go ahead and raise your hand, or go ahead and put a question in the chat for us.
Great. And I'll say, don't be bashful. I'll answer any question on any subject. I tell folks I'm really passionate, and it sounds like what I'm saying is like true. It may not be true. It's just my opinion. So keep that in mind.
And it looks like we do have a question from Shaka Cummings.
Mr. Canada, let me just say, as someone who grew up in Harlem, I so appreciate you. I so appreciate the work you're doing. I want to know, what was it that got you to Harlem and out of Boston? And what was it that then led you to look at Harlem and say the model around the promised neighborhood could work in Harlem? Because I was there in the 80s, and I wouldn't have thought it would have worked.
Wow. Thank you, and I appreciate the question. So I had two of my children who were in New York. My wife and I had separated when I was in Massachusetts, and I was coming back and forth from Boston to New York, and I just didn't want to be that kind of father. I wanted to be there with them, so I just left my job, had a great job, and came to New York, and I thought, I'll find a job, no problem. And 3 to 4 months, I sent out like 100 resumes. It was the middle of a recession in '83. I got no takers. I got one person who responded, a guy named Richard Murphy. I came in for the interview, took that job. I've been with the same organization. You fast forward 37, 38 years later. So to me, that's the short answer. It was an act of God. It wasn't a plan. It wasn't like, yeah, I wanted to go there. I had one offer. I took that offer, and I was there. How did I get to the zone? I got to the zone by following the data. I kept trying to figure out what's the one thing I could do, right? Was it early childhood? What if we work with kids till 12? Every time I thought I had an answer, I looked at the kids 3 or 4 years later, and they just looked like all the other kids, like we had never done anything. And I didn't think anybody was going to fund something as comprehensive as I was coming up with. But there became a point in time where I just said, I don't care. I know this is the truth. I know this is the answer. And I'm not going to work with my kids without at least fighting like heck to give them what I know will work. And I ended up doing some work with a foundation, Ed McConnell Clark, and we ended up doing a business plan, which ended up sort of getting funded, and the rest, as they say, is history.
This is, I'm Surekha Madinwar. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. With my accent, forgive me. I'm from India. I've been here since 67. I'm from a middle class, maybe upper middle class, but I had students in my class who were at the bottom of there was no class, it was at the lowest bottom. And the buck did not stop at the children like you are saying, is the children. It is the parents, regardless of the ability to pay for it or not. In India, till the 12th is education is paid by the government. I went to government public school because my parents, we have 6 children, they could not afford to send all 6 to private schools. So I think I was in New York from 67 till 77. Then I came to Eastern Kentucky. The reason being, I wanted to bring up my children in a place that I was brought up in India. Safe, secure, no traffic, safe place to be. So I came to Eastern Kentucky. But my children, my son was 2.5 years old when he came to Eastern Kentucky. Both the boys ended up in Columbia University in New York. My son was a valedictorian coming from Eastern Kentucky.
Yep.
So I always have said it is not the children, it is the parents. We were brought up that before you can put the food on the table, you must have the book on the table. So how do you feel about that?
That's great. It's a great question, the role of parents. And I have a standard answer for this, which is I divide my parents roughly into 3 categories. The first category, they love us. They volunteer anything we want. Miss Canada, we're so appreciative. A third of my parents are just hardworking folks, mostly single parents, who are themselves overwhelmed. So if I go in and say, will you do it? They're like, oh, if I have to, I'll do it. But it's a third of my parents have substance abuse problems, mental health problems, or they just don't have the, I think, energy, the psychic energy to do the job. This is what I tell my team. I want the same results for all 3 groups of kids. If that group of kids that the parents are engaged are doing better than that group of kids that the parents are not engaged, we're not doing our job. Our job is, regardless of parental involvement, to provide the support so that those children will succeed. So I will say it is easier when the parents are engaged. It is much harder when they're not. But if my team doesn't give me the same results, they can't work with me. We make no difference between the end result of parents who are just disengaged from the parenting effort versus the parents who are deeply engaged. We want the same outcome for the children. It just takes more work and harder work to get it.
Okay, well, let's take our next question from Julius Austin, who has his hand up right now, and then we'll go to get a question from the chat.
All right, so bear with me for one moment as I, on behalf of the National Coalition of Promise Zones, thank Donna and Dreama and all of the other folks over at Brushy Fork Leadership Summit for including us in this awesome keynote address by Mr. Geoffrey Canada. And now I want to move over to Mr. Canada. Mr. Canada, thank you so much for your awesome keynote address. This is actually an awesome moment for me. You have been a longtime hero of mine for the great work that you have done. And my question is, can you speak a little bit towards what have been some of the barriers to expand the work that you've done in Harlem, but also some of the barriers for the great work that you've done to be duplicated in other cities and areas, and maybe talk a little bit about what some of the possible solutions might be to those barriers. And if you care to share also maybe some of the key factors to the success of your Harlem Children's Zone.
Great, thank you very much for the question, Julius. I appreciate it, brother. Barriers, you know, when President Obama said he was going to replicate our work, he talked about putting together $1 billion package. Unfortunately, he had a Congress that would not ever give him the kind of resources necessary to get this work done. And so one of the biggest impediments was that the projects were never funded, fully funded at what I said when they asked me what I thought it would take to actually get this work done. They were never fully funded, both at the amount and for the length of time it takes to do this work. One of the challenges is that we've been at this 20 years. It took us about 12 to 13 years before we had the kind of results that drew people's attention. If someone had looked at our results in the first 4 or 5 years, they probably would have said, I'm not so sure this thing is working. To actually transform a community for real, you're going to have to really spend the kind of time to get that done. And a lot of the promised neighborhoods, they've got 3-4 years worth of funding, and then that funding ended. And my sense is that that's one of the challenges to the work. So resources is one, and at the William Jewis Wilson Institute, which I head up, we are trying to think about a public strategy for that, because on average, it takes about $2,500 a year per child on top of education to do these comprehensive services for us. People thought that was a lot of money. As I always reminded them, in New York City, this is New York City, this is not Kentucky. In New York City, incarceration for a year in a city jail, try $250,000. Now, the jails are booming. We're totally comfortable spending that kind of money on incarcerating kids, but don't want to spend a couple of $1,000s to save those kids. Part of that is just poor social policy. And part of it is the fact that a lot of the targeting of these resources have been linked to race. And I think that has disabled for the country to really come to grips with what's happening to all of its children. And they keep thinking we're trying to save those children versus our children. In terms of effectiveness, I think where I see the best results are for people who have a personal commitment to the work. This is not just a job. People who are really trying to build out cradle to career, and people who are having high expectations and prepared to hold themselves accountable for the results. Those to me are the things that when I've looked at successful replications, places that have those kind of replication, those are the kind of places, the kind of values I think they have. And it's one of the reasons I've been such a fan of Dreamers, is that she has, in my opinion, exhibited all of those values in rural America, which I think is important for the country.
Okay, thank you for that. So I'm going to pull a question out of the chat, and then we'll come to you, Madeline, okay? And I'm actually going to combine two questions because they look like they are related. And so the first question is, how do we fight back against crazy people who are against teaching critical race theory? CRT is vital to understanding the present culture. And then related to that question, someone says, echoing Kelly's question, what comes to your mind for helping folks become quickly engaged in examining the truths of the history of cultural difference and common cause?
So this is such a critical issue in the country, and one of the reasons is because it impacts public policy. And I want to separate the rhetoric from the public policy piece, and I think that people combine the two of them, so you almost don't know what you're talking about anymore. So I'm going to give two examples. When I was just heading out to college, there was a senator from New York named Moynihan, who was looking at the rates of unwed births in the Black community. And he did something called the Moynihan Report, which said, essentially, something's happening in the Black community. Suddenly, women are having babies and they're not married, and it's causing all of these issues because you don't have the two parents, the incomes, the other things. Well, it created a huge uproar. Blame the victim was invented. People called Moynihan a racist and other things. Today, in the white community, the rates of unwed sort of motherhood are higher than when Moynihan first saw it in the Black community. And in the Black community, it's gone even higher. So what Moynihan saw was not something wrong with the Black community. He saw something wrong with America that was changing. And he labeled it by race because Black people and brown people are often the canaries in the coal mine. You often see the issues there first. So that's one issue where social policy, if you understand how race plays into thinking about poverty and problems, you realize that you need to take that into account. The other example is the response to the drug epidemic. In the 70s, the drug epidemic was mostly happening in inner cities. And we decided to create a war on crime. And we locked up massive numbers of Black and brown, mostly men, and created the cradle to prison pipeline, which we're trying to dismantle today. As the drug epidemic has raised itself now in white America, we are having a totally different experience about what needs to happen, how we need to fix the problems and work with people. Again, here is where not understanding the role that race plays in our thinking about things has an impact on social policy. What I would argue with folks is, don't get caught up in something that if you ask 8 different people, they're going to have 8 different ways to explain what it is. And half of them are going to explain it in a way that's not helpful. So there's a lot of debate about critical race theory right now. What I'm looking for are the clear levers that we can show where race has impacted social policy, whether it's in housing, you look at the GI Bill and what happened in housing, whether it's in employment. I mean, we need to begin to build bridges that lead us to a better place and not one that creates, I think, this hostile environment where everybody's yelling at one another. And because I don't think that's helpful. So we started down that road. Now there's been pushback. We could have assumed there was going to be pushback after Black Lives Matters and all of that happened. There is pushback now around critical race theory. What I would tell folks is, don't get caught up in the moment of the rhetoric. Look for clear policy examples and let's try to undo those examples. We're not going to convince everybody about the history of race in this country. It is so painful and so devastating that I think people have had a strong dose of it, and some folks have to keep pushing on it. But those of us who are trying to save children and families, we shouldn't get drawn out of our lane to defend these kinds of issues, because I think it'll take us away from doing the work.
Okay, thank you. And then Madeline, you have a question.
Hello, thank you so much for coming here. And I really appreciated your talk. And I could see several points where I feel that I can follow in your footsteps as someone who really loves service work and wants to make any community I find myself in better than I found it. So I thank you for helping to mitigate issues surrounding young people's education, and by respecting them and giving them the resources to teach them about their limitlessness, because I think that was so important for me. And that is why I'm in the place I am in now, realizing the internal power I have in me, and that you worked so hard to show your students so that they could transcend their boundaries and believe in themselves and believe that they're not the product of their circumstances, but a product of all the things that they believe and can work hard for. So just mentioning, I really appreciated the point of having a superwoman or a superman or maybe a super community rallying around these issues, because that's what I had. And I saw, I can see the effect in my life. My superwoman instilled in me a fervent passion for service and a deep desire to do my all so that I can deeply and wonderfully enact good and effective change in my communities. And I don't want to wait for circumstances to line up before doing something. And this is the work and purpose I believe that I am called to. But a challenge I face, and not just in my work now, but in everyday life, is that this superwoman is partly my biological mother, But that's where the challenge comes from. The superwoman that has helped raised me more is someone completely different, and someone who has worked to make, just like you. Your stories it's so similar, it's uncanny that she came back to her community and worked so hard to educate so many girls who would otherwise not have had the opportunity to go to school. But a challenge I face is that my biological mother, as much as she worked really hard to make sure all of her children are well educated and that none of us, no matter our financial situation, would have no issues going to school, she has a stronger desire to see me and my sisters succeed more materially and then serve the community later. And this is my challenge because I want to, and I feel like there should be space for me to not only work towards succeeding materially, but also work now to build some spiritual development, to develop spiritually and to work with my community. I feel like both could go hand in hand. And it seemed to me that you believe the same. So I was wondering, what kind of advice would you give me, or how could you advise me to navigate the situation where someone I deeply love and respect is expecting something from me from coming from a good place, but someone I don't agree with completely?
It's a great question, and many of us are dealing with the pressures of our parents and those who love us. And I'll tell you a quick story, Madeline. When I was in college, I told my professors I wanted to be a teacher, and my science professors did everything they could to stop me from doing that. They said, you don't want to be a teacher, you're not going to make any money, there's not going to be any prestige, you should go to medical school. And for a while, they really convinced me, I mean, they really did, that I should become a doctor because you know, they were looking down on education and the social services because of the pay and other things. I am so happy I did not listen to them, that I decided I was going to chart my own path and accept the results, right? So look, I didn't make that much money early on in my career, I didn't, but there is not one day I've been unhappy in doing the work I've done, not one. And I know folks who made a lot of money and I would love to say, and they're unhappy. They're not unhappy. They made a lot of money, they're happy, but they're not happier than I am. And they haven't lived a happier life than I've lived. So I think if you follow your passion, in the end, that's going to be the reward that you care about the most. And love your mother, respect and honor your mother, but you live your life and follow your dream, because in the end, you know, the ability to make a difference is going to rest in people like you. And if they are talked out of coming in and helping move this needle forward, our people aren't going to be successful. You'll get the next young lady to go out in the business and make a lot of money and do it. You'll be the instrument for that to happen. And just let your mom know, some of us have to get at this from different avenues. And I just see in your spirit that this is the right field for you to be in, so stick with it.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Geoffrey. I know that we are actually a little bit over time now, and we want to honor your time. And I'm sorry for the folks who if you had questions that you didn't quite get to ask, then hopefully you can hold on to those and maybe find another opportunity. But we want to express our appreciation again for having you come to speak with us, and hope that everybody has a great day the rest of the afternoon.
Well, thank you so much for the invite. If you couldn't tell, I loved having a chance to talk to everybody and wishing everybody the best.
Thanks so much.